Hey everyone, thanks for coming out again, even though I know you have to. Now, this is a good friend of mine behind me that you people might recognize because it's in a picture from my article that you actually read. We're going to start doing qualitative methods. Now, remember, this is not quantitative methods, this is qualitative methods, and there is significant differences. First, quantitative is basically variable oriented. We're taking variables like we did with ice cream consumption. We're taking variables like we did with the mice and radiation, which I want to make sure I do not do those things. So if you're in PETA, don't come and blow up my house. But they did give mice the radiation, and the radiation was the independent variable, and the survival rate of the mice was the dependent variable. This is different. This is more case analysis. So it's really getting deep into cases. That's why I have my friend here behind me with what we call a mortero, where I immersed myself. It's kind of like ethnography is one type of qualitative methods where you actually like learn a language, understand the people, culturally understand them, etc. So it can be both interpretive and what we call positivist. Positivists can look for interacting variables within a case. And that is exactly what we're going to do with the Syria case. It's not as easy, or it's different, let's say, than the quantitative methods, because the quantitative methods you're looking for, certain kind of let's say a multivariate approach. You have a number of interacting independent variables where you actually code. With qualitative methods, you're taking a case and kind of finding, and this is exactly what process tracing is, you're finding these disparate interacting variables that are seemingly unrelated, but become related when you see the bigger picture. So when we see the documentary on Syria, we start seeing all these different variables, and we ask a question. And that question is, how did Bashar al-Assad of Syria survive, whereas others during the Arab Spring, like Tunisia, Mubarak in Egypt, etc., did not? I do this activity with just a broad spectrum of classes because it's very good. It's basically, we're looking for the variables. It's not amenable to quantitative research. It's basically, you're looking at this case to see interesting variables that might be peculiar to this case. So it's not that you can just run regression or agent-based modeling. You have to understand the case of Syria. So we start seeing variables, and again, this is positivist, but qualitative. I want to make that perfectly clear. So you basically start seeing variables where you wouldn't see. So we see, like, for example, a lot of variables that help Bashar al-Assad survive the rise of Russia, which wasn't there before. So that's a variable. His mother, the documentary talks about. That's very interesting if you think about it, because it's like, the old guard, how he has to be brutal, just like his father. There's so many interacting variables. The fact that Egypt happened and Libya, both Gaddafi and Mubarak were overthrown, but what happened to their societies? They completely disintegrated. So they brought back a military dictatorship in Egypt, and now Libya is a total disaster. We don't even have, that as the United States, an embassy there. So a lot of people in the bourgeois in Syria look at that and say, we might not like Bashar al-Assad, but we want to keep him because we don't know what happens next. So that fear of what will happen next might help solidify Bashar al-Assad's power, because people are scared to go the way of Egypt, and now you have el-Sisi, another dictatorship, or Libya, where, after the overthrow of Gaddafi, now it's a disaster. So you start looking at all these variables when we see the documentary on Syria that kind of come together, and that's what process tracing is, these disparate variables that come together and produce a result. And then we start looking, wow, why was Mubarak of Egypt overthrown in the Arab Spring, but now not Bashar al-Assad? They might be different variables, but we're looking at variance, different outcomes in the dependent variable. And in this case, the dependent variable is survival. That is, Bashar al-Assad survived Mubarak, Gaddafi did not. And also you have obviously NATO in Libya. So you have all these different interacting variables that we're looking at. They're not always the same. So they're not completely amenable to quantitative research. Qualitative research also, that is, I want to go back in the case study analysis, I want to be clear, then it's not amenable to quantitative research because we're finding interacting variables that might take place in one case but not another, but might produce similar results. That is the survival of a dictatorship. Bashar al-Assad survived, others do not. So that's, and really, it's what's really interesting about qualitative methods. I used to do quant, I studied economics, but when I lived in Nicaragua 8 years, like this guy behind me in the middle of a protest, I started learning so much, and understanding qualitative methods is very important. Qualitative methods is a method that's not numerical. So you start understanding things that a lot of quantitative research fails to do. You learn the language, you understand the culture, so you're able to get closer. So like here in a protest in Nicaragua, why is Nicaragua more unstable than, say, Costa Rica? These are very important questions that sometimes only ethnographers, people who immerse themselves in a society can learn and understand, to tease out different variables. That's why when you read Venezuela, using the New York Times or the State Department to code political terror, is extremely, extremely, difficult. And all these things around me. Remember, we are doing this under quarantine. This is very difficult at this moment, and I hope everyone is doing amazing, because essentially being under quarantine is very, very difficult for a lot of people. We see people losing their jobs, etc. And that's why I also want to talk about qualitative methods. A lot of qualitative methods are done in health policies. You study a hospital, what methods work for nurses and what methods don't work for nurses. So when you start thinking of a paper, start thinking about anything you would like to basically do. So let's say, for example, you're interested in refugees. You could see, why does one refugee camp work well and not another? So you're basically looking at different phenomena and seeing why something works and when something doesn't. One student wrote a really good paper for me in this class once, and the paper was on why North Korea started, a lot of people don't know, started extremely well, that is economically, and was actually outpacing South Korea economically, but then kind of petered out. So why? And she kind of, did this qualitative paper comparing the two economies of North Korea and South Korea. Very good. You could do a wide range of different things here that are absolutely amazing. So I want everyone to start thinking about their paper. And with qualitative methods, you really learn about other people. So here you can see now behind me this is Sandino. I talked about him a lot. That's more interpretive, but still qualitative. Process tracing, remember, are interacting variables that produce a result. So it is positivist. But what's good about qualitative methods, it also, by living there, learning about the people, you learn different intersubjective understandings. So qualitative methods is valuable for that as well. So here you see Sandino Vive, Sandino lives. Remember, the State Department, the US government used to call Sandino, because he fought against the US government, as a bandit. But then the Sandinistas, who took power in Nicaragua, where I lived 8 years, overthrew Somoza, a brutal dictator, and then just didn't rename him, but just gave him different meaning. And we see this with a broad range of things. Here I am again during a protest in Colombia. This was a protest against a lot of the farmers in the rural areas that basically lost their land or lost their livelihood to what they call Plan Colombia, where we supported getting rid of a wide range of crops, basically cocaine. But the problem with that is a lot of crops, other crops, were destroyed. And a lot of people lost their land. And a lot of people have suffered. And this is in Bogota. They all came out to basically protest against the government. This is what qualitative research is, qualitative on-the-ground research. You begin to learn things. So you could basically learn about, say, in this case, the disaster of US foreign policy in Colombia with Plan Colombia, that was basically beefing up the military of Colombia to beat the insurgency group, the FARC, and the negative ramifications it had on Colombia. And you could also do something, you're going to see a video of mine where I basically talk about the end of the conflict in Colombia and how initiatives, quite creative ones, as you're going to see. I'm in this bar in Pushkin. I'm drinking a beer in Bogota. It's very good, but it was created by ex-combatants of the FARC. That is the guerrilla group that was trying to overthrow the government, although they had a very small ability. I mean, they had a huge ability to wreak havoc, but a very small chances, let's say the probability was very small to actually overthrow the government. But the point is that now that they went through a peace process, what do they do in order to get the ex-combatants away from fighting and incorporate it into regular society? And that is one way they've done it. So in qualitative methods, that's a case on how, after the Civil War, how initiatives are trying to incorporate ex-combatants into regular society, civil society. So it's very, very important. So I only learned about that by being there. So qualitative methods is very interesting. And we're going to see a lot of subsets of qualitative methods, ethnography, immersion, but it doesn't have to be like that. You can also do archival research, the first documents. You're going to read a research paper I did on the Central American Court of Justice, where I used a lot of archival research, and it's a qualitative work. When you read my article on Nicaraguan privatization, I use both quantitative survey data, which is going to be important, finding a correlation between income and people who support privatization. And then it's qualitative. Why did privatization fail? That part is qualitative. So I go through institutions and why it basically failed. And that's qualitative. So a good qualitative paper, you can do a case study on something that you really care about or something that relates to a potential career, and do a case on that. Like, why, say, for example, if you're interested in foreign policy, why did diplomacy with one country work, but not the other? Interesting case. So when we do the Syrian case, we're going to watch those documentaries, and we're going to see, I've done this in my course on political science. It's called political science, to understand, what social scientists do. And that's a great question. Why did Bashar al-Assad survive, whereas others did not? That is a great question, and social sciences and qualitative methods helps us understand that. Just like here, behind me, you see this protest. I know I move around a lot, but that's something you have to deal with, not me. And you basically have it. This, of course, I'm in another protest. Again, this is more immersion, ethnography, learning about people, learning their language, etc., which produces good results and good research. And we're actually going to see some videos on this type of real documentaries, not just my shorter videos, on why these things happen. Like, why does one society develop and not the other? These are very interesting. Like, why in the United States is the industrialized North richer than, say, the rural South? There's a wide range of variables we can discover using history, using archival research, historical path dependency, studying the colonization, the different colonization patterns of society. So there's a lot qualitative methods does, but I want to make sure, and it's not that qualitative methods doesn't use any descriptive statistics. I mean, you can sit there and use a lot of descriptive statistics, but we're not running them in our studio, that is the statistical environment. So, you can draw upon statistics to find certain variables and why one case went one way and another one another, but it is more qualitative, right? We're speaking. We do discourse analysis. There's a wide range of things you can do. So I want you to start thinking. And here is really interesting: a protest after the submarine in Argentina. I took all these pictures, of course, and this is basically I was there present during a protest against the government, Macri at the time, and he lost, and this is one of the reasons. So you can ask, like, why did Macri, the president of Argentina, even though there's a right-wing swing in Latin America, why did Macri, a more conservative president, lose to the leftists recently? And this is one reason. So a lot of people attribute, not necessarily saying he blew up the submarine. If you know the story, a submarine was lost in Argentina, but a lot of people thought he wasn't very forthcoming and didn't go into the investigation well. And this basically could have, one variable among others. Remember, process tracing looks at interacting variables, all disparate. It's different from quantitative, in which you're looking at these very interesting variables. You're like a detective with process tracing. tracing. You're looking for variables. So why did McAfee lose the election? Let's look at all these different variables and come to a conclusion on why he lost the election. But like in Brazil, it went very right-wing. Why did it do that? So, that's a comparative case studies. So first process tracing looks at cases, and then it kind of adds cases, like why is one different than the other? And these are very important questions. And this, my research isn't just limited to Latin America. This is interesting because this also shows political prisoners, it says, in Barcelona. So like one of the interesting things about qualitative methods is you're really getting your hands dirty because you're trying to see different people's understanding of the world. So we supported 100%, Spain's crackdown on Catalonia's independence. If that was another country, North Korea, Venezuela, that we didn't like, that would have been all over the news, right? It's, oh my God, look at their cracking down, etc. I'll send out a video on it. Very interesting. So the question becomes, how, learning about different societies, and it doesn't have to be a country. It could be like I said, a refugee camp. It could be a war. Why has, say, Colombia been successful with the peace process in Colombia, rooting out the FARC, whereas others haven't been? And you're going to see a short video on me in Colombia in clever ways to incorporate ex-combatants, and that's kind of like a case study. And behind me, you might see, is a head. Let me see if I can get out of the way. I don't know how I'm doing yet. That's a head. That's a shrunken head. I stuck my head in the Amazon for a little bit, and there were real head hunters, not now, and it was in a museum, and it was a head. It was a head that was basically cut off, shrunken by headhunted indigenous people in Ecuador. Why do I have that there? Why did I go to a museum with a severed head and do it? Because I really have issues. But I'll end this thing here, but it's very interesting because how people fight. They used to war with other indigenous tribes. So it's very, very interesting, this head. I like to show it in my political violence class because I talk about it. This is a head, a real shrunken head by headhunters in the Amazon who used to fight. Again, now I can't stay when I stuck my head in the Amazon, no pun intended, just for a little while. And I can't stay there long because I actually almost died of dengue. So I don't like putting my head there because then I think, God, that's symbolic. My head's going to be there one day. So basically, I can't be in there because I almost died of dengue hemorrhagico. So unlike other diseases, you don't get stronger. You actually get weaker, much weaker. So if you get it again, dengue hemorrhagico, you can actually die quite rapidly. And I had to get a platelet transfusion, not a blood transfusion, a platelet transfusion. It's very, very interesting. So that is a severed head. Very interesting. You could do a research on that. We're going to see a video on tribes in Latin America as well later on. So we're going to see a lot of subsets of grounded theory is one. You're going to read a little about that, etc. How you're going in without any theory or whatever and letting the data speak to you. That's the main point of grounded theory, which I like. And then you kind of code, you tease out a lot of different things. And we're going to see a video that kind of helps you with that. Actually, two very interesting ones. So I hope you kind of understand qualitative methods, particularly the more positivist process tracing, interacting variables that don't seem to be related, but when you look closely at the case, they become related and we kind of understand it a little better. So with that ado, me and my friend here, I don't know his name, but we will bid you for adieu right now. My French is really bad. Not that my Spanish nor my English is very polished, but please leave any questions you have in our community forum. So that way I'll be able to understand. Look at that big head in there. Ooh, that thing's scary, to be honest with you. I'm going to have nightmares. Okay, take care, everyone. And I hope everyone's safe with being under quarantine under these very difficult conditions.